Assisted dying, as it is euphemistically called, is often presented as a more compassionate, civilized alternative to human suffering. Why shouldn't unwell people be given help by the authorities to end their lives in a manner of their choosing? This is surely much more humane, or so advocates argue. Well, those still gripped by this delusion should take a look at Justin Trudeau's Canada, where assisted dying has become a gruesome, state-sanctioned industry. There is nothing remotely civilized about Canada's Medical Assistance in Dying, or MAID, program. Assisted dying in Canada was initially considered a last resort for terminally ill patients suffering from incurable pain. But in the space of just a few years, euthanasia has been made available to pretty much anyone who is struggling with an illness or disability. People facing homelessness and poverty are feeling compelled to end their lives rather than burden the authorities. Things are about to get even grimmer. In 2027, Canadians will be able to apply for MAID on the grounds that they are suffering from a mental illness. Originally, this change in the law was due to take effect in March this year, but it was postponed at the 11th hour. If this expansion goes ahead, anyone with a serious mental health condition may be eligible for assisted suicide or euthanasia, even if they're not suffering from any physical pain at all. So, in just over a decade, Canada has gone from legalising assisted dying in certain tight circumstances to offering suicide as an alternative to life's woes. This amounts to a cautionary tale about the cruel disregard for human life that is unleashed when you legitimise assisted suicide. In December 2015, Quebec became the first Canadian province to allow euthanasia for terminally ill patients. Others soon followed. In June 2016, the Canadian Parliament passed legislation that changed the criminal code to allow terminally ill adults to access assisted dying across the country. This created the MAID program, which offers both euthanasia, when a doctor actively ends a patient's life with a lethal injection, and assisted suicide, when a patient is given the drugs to end his or her own life. At the time, MAID was sold to Canadians as a question of autonomy. The right to die was presented as a fundamental human right. In 2015, the Canadian Supreme Court even ruled that denying someone assisted suicide or euthanasia denied equality to the physically disabled.
This is a momentous occasion.
The Canadian public seemed to agree. In 2014, not long before MAID was introduced, 79% of Canadians supported assisted suicide being offered in limited circumstances. But once the law had changed, it didn't take long for those restrictions to loosen. In 2021, 5 years after MAID was first introduced, Canada expanded the eligibility criteria. Those with serious and chronic physical conditions became eligible, even when their illness was not life-threatening. A long-term health condition that made life intolerable was now enough. Applying for MAID became significantly easier. Soon, people began applying for MAID for reasons that had almost nothing to do with health. One of the most infamous cases was that of Amir Fassoud, a 54-year-old disabled man who applied for MAID in 2022 because he was about to be made homeless. Fassoud was quite open about the fact that he didn't actually want to die. He simply didn't know what else to do. He felt that he was being abandoned by the authorities, and he decided that he would rather be dead than homeless. Homelessness, or fear of it, is not one of the reasons Canadians can apply for MAID, not yet at least. But Fassoud could apply on the basis of his chronic back pain. He got as far as receiving one of the 2 doctor's signatures required to proceed. Thankfully, after a public outpouring of support and a wave of donations, he decided that he didn't want to go through with it. Others weren't so lucky. In February 2022, a 51-year-old woman known only by the pseudonym Sophia was euthanized by doctors. She suffered from an extreme sensitivity to household chemicals and cigarette smoke, which made life unbearable for her. Because of her complex needs, the local authorities found it difficult to house her. Sophia spent 2 years asking for help with her living situation, to no avail. Eventually, she decided that MAID was the only solution left. 4 doctors wrote to federal officials on Sophia's behalf, begging them to help her find alternative accommodation. But their pleas fell on deaf ears, and she was killed instead. In a similar case, 61-year-old Donna Duncan was euthanized in 2022, after she was deprived of the treatment she so desperately needed. A car accident left her with a particularly bad concussion, and this led to months of mental and physical decline. She was never seen by her local clinic for complex chronic diseases, thanks to its months-long waiting list. But when she applied for MAID, she was approved within a few days. Her daughters maintained that she did not have the capacity to consent to being euthanized. Stories like these are shockingly common. For many Canadians, accessing MAID is easier and cheaper than getting the treatment or care they need. More and more people are applying for MAID because they cannot afford to go on living, or their families cannot afford to support them. In 2021, almost 36% of MAID patients said that they believed themselves to be a burden on family, friends, or caregivers. The Canadian authorities are all but promoting death as a cheaper, easier alternative to life's struggles. In 2022, an Army veteran called up Veterans Affairs Canada seeking treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder and a brain injury. He was offered MAID instead. Christine Gauthier, a veteran and former Paralympian, asked the authorities if she could have a stair lift installed in her home. Instead, she received a letter asking if she had ever considered euthanasia. Given cases like these, disability rights campaigners have become some of the fiercest opponents of Canada's euthanasia laws. In January last year, more than 50 organisations warned that MAID poses an existential threat to disabled people, devaluing their lives and providing the state with an excuse to forego its responsibilities to them. These groups rightly argue that Canada should be improving its healthcare services for disabled people and helping them to live decent lives, rather than offering them assisted dying as a solution. The same applies to terminally ill patients too. The priority should be ensuring the best quality end-of-life care, rather than ending people's lives sooner than is necessary. In many cases, it is the absence of decent palliative care that is driving so many terminally ill patients to seek euthanasia in the first place. With the MAID programme set to expand to the mentally ill in 2027, we will undoubtedly see a new wave of heartbreaking cases. 47-year-old Lisa Pauly plans to apply for MAID as soon as the law changes, on account of her debilitating anorexia. She has tried everything, she told Reuters recently, and is now too tired to go on. Another mentally ill woman admitted to CTV News that she is terrified of the expansion. She is worried that she will seek out MAID when she next has suicidal thoughts. The grim realities of MAID seem to have given Canadians pause for thought. Public opinion has turned significantly. As of 2023, only 30% of Canadians supported opening up MAID to people with mental health difficulties. Unfortunately, tragedies will continue to occur so long as death care remains more accessible than healthcare. In 2022, MAID was responsible for over 4% of all deaths in Canada. That was up from 3.3% in 2021 and 2.5% in 2020. In Quebec, a shocking 8% of all deaths in 2022 were attributable to the MAID programme. As if all this were not horrifying enough, there remains a vocal minority, including high-profile healthcare individuals, that is advocating to expand MAID even further. Children born with severe disabilities and elderly people who are supposedly tired of being alive have been put forward as potential candidates for legalised euthanasia. All of this is well beyond the bounds of what Canadians were originally told MAID would entail. But stories of homeless, poor, disabled and desperate people accessing a state-assisted death are merely the grim, logical consequence of legalising assisted dying in the first place. Assisted dying undermines the value of life, elevating death as the ultimate solution to suffering. Canada is a warning to the world. This is where the right to die leads us. Anyone who values humanity should ensure their own nation doesn't follow down this dark path.